She didn't come to Seoul looking for a husband. She came because grief had made Atlanta unbearable. Because every corner of her grandmother's house held a memory that could stop her breathing. Because sometimes the only way to survive losing someone is to put an ocean between yourself and everything they ever touched. 3 years later, Nadia Cole had built something small and imperfect and completely hers. A studio apartment in Mapogu with a window that faced the Han River. A classroom full of 7-year-olds who called her Nadia teacher and screamed with delight when she mispronounced their names. A routine that felt, some mornings, almost like peace. Then the men in the black suits came, and peace became a memory too. If you're already hooked, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This story gets so much better. Drop a heart emoji below and tell me, Team Nadia or Team Shin? Let's go. There were 2 of them. They didn't knock so much as materialize. One moment her doorway was empty. The next it contained 2 walls of navy-suited silence. The taller one had a scar that bisected his left eyebrow. The shorter one carried a manila envelope like it contained the terms of a war. Miss Cole. Not a question. They knew exactly who she was. Nadia had been raised by a grandmother who believed that fear was a luxury you couldn't afford until the danger had passed. So she kept her voice level and her hand on the edge of her door and said, "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." The scarred one almost smiled. Almost. "We're not here to sell anything. We're here because of your father." Her stomach dropped 3 floors. She hadn't spoken to Marcus Cole in 11 years. Last she'd heard, he was somewhere in Busan, running a scheme that involved cryptocurrency and promises he had no intention of keeping. Her grandmother had cried when Nadia moved abroad. Marcus hadn't bothered to call. "My father," she repeated carefully, "is not my problem. Unfortunately," the shorter man said, setting the manila envelope on her kitchen table without being invited in. "He has made himself your problem. Specifically, the $2 million he owes to the Shin family has become your problem. Your father borrowed against a promise. That promise concerned you." She stared at the envelope. "Didn't touch it." "What kind of promise?" "The kind that fathers make when they're desperate and their daughters are young enough that they can pretend it will never come due." He folded his hands. 20 years ago, your father promised you to the Shin heir, in exchange for the debt to be forgiven, and for the protection of the Cole name in certain business arrangements." The room was very quiet. "He promised me," Nadia said slowly, "to a person, to Shin Jae-won." "Yes." She laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound came out high and strange and slightly unhinged. "I'm sorry. A man I've never met, from a family I've never heard of, thinks he can collect me like a debt payment because my deadbeat father made a promise before I was old enough to have an opinion about it." "Shin Jae-won," the scarred man said quietly, "is not a man who collects debts. He is the man that men who collect debts are afraid of." He reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the table. She didn't want to look. She looked. The man in the photograph was standing outside what appeared to be a press conference, flanked by men whose eyes moved like weapons. He was tall. She could tell even through the lens, with the kind of face that photographers chased and enemies memorized. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that held absolutely nothing. He wore a charcoal suit like it had been designed specifically to make him look inevitable. "He's 34, the shorter man offered. "Oxford educated, fluent in 4 languages. He has agreed to the arrangement." "Has he?" Nadia's voice was very flat. "How progressive of him. And what happens if I say no?" Silence. The specific kind that answers the question without having to say a word. "Your father's debt doesn't disappear, Miss Cole. It transfers to the people closest to him." A pause. "You have a younger sister. She's studying at Spelman, I believe. 2nd year." The world went cold. Amara, 20 years old and brilliant, and the only piece of her family Nadia had never been able to stop loving even when she tried. "Don't," she said softly. "We're not threatening. We're explaining consequences." The scarred man stood, straightening his jacket. "Shin Jae-won is being extraordinarily generous. He's offering to forgive the debt entirely, protect your family, give you his name and every comfort that comes with it. A beat. He only asks for the one thing your father already promised." After they left, Nadia sat in the dark for 2 hours. Then she picked up the photograph and looked at those empty eyes for a long time. She made herself one promise. One single, non-negotiable promise, the same way her grandmother had taught her to survive the unsurvivable. Whatever happened next, whatever she had to endure in a marriage she didn't choose, in a life she didn't ask for, she would not be the one to surrender. Not her body, not her dignity, not her voice. She would marry Shin Jae-won, but she would never ask. Comment right now, what would you have done in Nadia's position? I need to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button. This story is just getting started. The wedding was the most beautiful cage she had ever seen. Silk in deep burgundy and gold. Jade pins in her natural hair, which Mrs. Park, the wedding coordinator, a woman who smiled like a contract, had arranged into an updo so elegant Nadia barely recognized herself. The hanbok moved like water when she walked. The guests were 100 strangers in a hall that probably cost more than her apartment building. She felt their eyes the moment she entered. The barely concealed surprise. The whispers she couldn't quite catch. A black woman, American, an outsider, entering one of Seoul's most feared families through the front door. She lifted her chin and kept walking because her grandmother had also taught her that you don't let a room know it's gotten to you. Shin Jae-won was waiting at the altar. She had looked at his photograph so many times in the past 3 days that she thought she knew his face. She was wrong. The photograph had captured his features but missed entirely the quality he carried in person. A stillness so absolute it felt like weather. Like standing at the edge of something vast and realizing the vastness was looking back. He watched her walk toward him with those dark, empty eyes, and she stared right back because she refused, absolutely refused, to be the first one to look away. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in it so briefly she might have imagined it. The ceremony was in Korean. She repeated vows she didn't understand, binding herself to a stranger in a language that wasn't hers, and hated every second of the powerlessness of it. When the officiant pronounced them married, Shin Jae-won lifted her veil with hands that were. She hated noticing this, surprisingly gentle. The kiss was brief, formal. His lips barely brushed hers. She had braced for something worse. The absence of worse was almost more unsettling. The applause sounded like a door closing. The penthouse was 40 floors of cold marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul glittered below like it was showing off. The master bedroom had a bed the size of a small country and art on the walls that Nadia was fairly sure cost more than her college degree. She stood in the center of it, still wearing the hanbok, and waited. Shin Jae-won entered without knocking, which, she supposed, was technically his right now, and the thought made her jaw tighten. He poured whiskey from a crystal decanter, his jacket already discarded, his tie loosened. He moved through the space like he owned it because he did. He looked at her over his glass. She looked back. "You're angry," he said. His English was perfect, with an accent that barely existed. "I'm furious," she corrected. "There's a difference." Something that might have been amusement moved across his face and disappeared. He set down the glass and crossed the room. Not toward her, she realized, but past her, toward the window. He stood with his back to her, looking at the city below. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it, not react to it. Can you do that?" "Depends on what it is." "That's fair." Pause. "I will not touch you. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not until you ask me to. Directly. By name." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. "Excuse me?" He turned from the window. His face was as unreadable as always, but his voice was absolutely certain. "You heard me. This marriage is real. You are my wife. You'll bear my name, live here, appear at my side when the situation requires it. But your body is yours. I will take nothing that isn't freely given." Nadia stared at him, searched for the trap, for the cruelty dressed up as generosity. "Men like you don't make promises like that. Men like me." His jaw shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes. Complicated and painful, there and gone. "You don't know what kind of man I am. Then explain it to me." For a long moment she thought he wouldn't. Then, "My mother was not a woman who was asked for things. She was a woman things were taken from." His voice was completely flat. "I am not my father. I have made choices he would call weakness. This is one of them." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "The guest room is prepared," he said. turning back toward the door. You'll sleep there. The staff will see to anything you need. Wait. He stopped. The vow, she said. You're keeping it even though no one's making you. Especially because no one's making me. He left. The door closed quietly behind him, which somehow felt worse than a slam. Nadia stood alone in the enormous room and made herself breathe. She'd expected a monster. She'd gotten something far more dangerous. A man with a code. A man who had every advantage and chose not to use it. She kept her promise anyway. She would never ask. Pause. Drop a comment. Did you expect him to say that? Because I did not see it coming the first time. Like this video if Shin Jae-won is already living in your head rent-free. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when a man like this meets a woman like Nadia. The war began quietly the way the most dangerous wars do. He left before dawn. She woke to coffee made exactly the way she liked it. Oat milk, no sugar, embarrassingly hot, and a note in handwriting so precise it looked typeset. Back tonight. The staff will assist you. She drank the coffee standing at the window, watching Sol wake up below her, and refused to be moved by the fact that he'd asked someone how she took it. On the second day, she found a bookshelf in the library stocked with English titles. Some of them were even good. She refused to be moved by that either. On the fourth day, she left a note on the kitchen counter. You look tired. There's chamomile tea in the cabinet on the left. He left one back. I don't drink chamomile. I drank it anyway. On the seventh day, they were in the same room for the first time since the wedding night. He was reviewing documents at the dining table at 11 p.m. when she came out of the guest room for water, and they regarded each other across the kitchen island with the particular wariness of two people who have agreed to a ceasefire but don't fully trust the terms. Sit, he said. Not a command, more like an offering, the kind that comes out gruff because the person giving it isn't practiced at softness. I'm only getting water. I know. Sit anyway. She sat. Across the island. Arms folded. He poured her a glass without being asked and went back to his documents. They sat in silence for 20 minutes. It was, she hated to admit, not entirely terrible. Why Oxford? She said finally. He glanced up. What? You studied at Oxford. Why? You were clearly always going to end up here. Something shifted in his expression. My mother wanted it. She wanted me to have a life that looked different from the one she had. She died before she could see whether it worked. Nadia absorbed that. Did it? Work? The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. I'm sitting in a penthouse running a criminal empire at midnight. You tell me. It was almost funny. She caught herself before the smile broke through. He saw it anyway. She could tell by the way he looked back at his documents with slightly too much focus. This was the problem with Shin Jae-won. He noticed everything. The first real argument happened on a Tuesday. He came home with a security detail she hadn't been informed about. For men who materialized in the hallway outside her classroom building and escorted her home like she was a diplomatic package. You can't just assign bodyguards to me without telling me, she said the moment he walked through the door that evening. I had to explain to my co-teacher why I suddenly have a security detail. Do you know what she thinks now? She thinks I'm in witness protection. You might as well be, he said, setting down his briefcase with infuriating calm. There are people who have recently become aware of our marriage. Some of them would like to use you to send me a message. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you. She stopped. Before your father sold me. The sentence finished itself in her head, and she didn't say it because it was too true and too ugly, and she had too much self-respect to weaponize her own humiliation. He was watching her. That stillness again, like he was waiting for her to land wherever the thought was taking her. The bodyguards stay, he said finally. I'll tell you in advance next time. It's not a negotiation, Nadia. First time he'd said her name. It hit differently than she expected, which was annoying. On this one thing, you don't have to like it, but you will be safe. She stared at him. He stared back. Fine, she said. But I want to meet them. I want to know their names. They're not furniture. He blinked. A fraction of a second. That's a reasonable request. I'm a reasonable person. I'm beginning to see that. He picked up his briefcase. Their names are Kim, Park, Sung, and Lee. Kim is the one who makes terrible jokes. You'll like him. He went to his office. She stood in the kitchen and reminded herself, firmly, that a man knowing his employees' personalities was not romantic. It was just basic management. She was not falling for this man. She was absolutely not. Oh, she's in trouble and she knows it. Comment your favorite line so far. And if you're watching this on a second account because you forgot to subscribe on your main one, you know who you are, go fix that right now. Like, subscribe and I'll keep feeding you stories like this one. Minji arrived on a Saturday like a small explosion in a designer coat. She was 26, Shin Jae-won's half-sister from their father's second marriage, and she possessed the specific energy of someone who had decided early in life that rules were suggestions written for less interesting people. She blew through the penthouse door while Nadia was eating cereal in her pajamas and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. "Oh," she said in excellent English. "You're prettier than the photos. Also taller. Do you play basketball?" "Everyone asks me that," Nadia said. "Because you're tall. It's a compliment." Minji dropped her bag on the counter and opened the refrigerator with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. "I'm Minji, his sister. The fun one. Where is he?" "Office." Minji wrinkled her nose. "Of course. He works like breathing will kill him." She found the orange juice, poured 2 glasses, pushed one toward Nadia. "He hasn't been mean to you, has he? Because I have a list of things I can say to him that will genuinely ruin his day." Despite everything, Nadia laughed. "He hasn't been mean. No, he wouldn't be. He saves mean for people who've earned it." Minji studied her with bright, curious eyes. "He makes your coffee every morning. Did you know that? He asked Mrs. Kim how you took it on day 1. He's never made coffee for anyone in his life. He has people for that. He's just being a host. My brother," Minji said pleasantly, "does not do anything just. Everything he does is on purpose. He looked at your personnel file from the school. He knows all your students' names." She tilted her head. "He smiles at his phone sometimes when you text him." Nadia's chest did something she didn't give it permission to do. People smile at their phones. Jae-won doesn't. Minji. They both looked up. Shin Jae-won stood in the kitchen doorway, his expression carrying the particular exasperation of a man whose privacy had just been comprehensively invaded. He said something in Korean. Minji responded in Korean. The exchange lasted 30 seconds and ended with Minji making a gesture that translated across every language as "and." "So? She was going to find out eventually," Minji said, switching back to English with the confidence of someone who knew she'd already won. "You like her. It's embarrassing how obvious it is. You're leaving by 6. We're going shopping first. Don't make that face. She needs friends, J1. You can't keep her locked up in your very beautiful castle like some kind of emotionally unavailable dragon. 2 bodyguards. 4. 3, and you're back by 6. Minji beamed. Deal. She looped her arm through Nadia's. Come on. He's going to stand there being handsome and brooding for at least another 10 minutes, and it's much more fun to watch from a distance. Nadia let herself be pulled toward the door, and caught. Just caught. The look on Shin Jae-won's face in the moment he thought no one was watching. It wasn't the look of a man performing a transaction. It was the look of someone watching something he was afraid to want. She filed it away in the part of herself she was supposed to be guarding and pretended she hadn't seen it at all. Minji is sending me. Comment if you want her to have her own story. And this is the part where I need you to hit subscribe because the next section is where everything changes. You do not want to miss it. Like this video if you're rooting for these two despite yourself. She started learning Korean in earnest because of a phone call she wasn't supposed to overhear. 3 weeks into the marriage, she woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of Shin Jae-won's voice from the living room. Low, controlled, but carrying something underneath it that she'd started to be able to read the way you learn to read weather. Tension that had nowhere to go. She caught 3 words in the rapid-fire Korean. Her name, a number, something that sounded like a threat. She enrolled in an intensive language course the next morning. When he discovered the study materials on the kitchen table 2 weeks later, he stopped in the middle of pouring his coffee and stared at them for a long moment. You're learning. I live here. I should know what people are saying. He set down the coffee pot, crossed to the table, turned the textbook over in his hands. This is advanced. I learn fast. Something moved in his expression. Say something. She'd been practicing this sentence for 3 days. She took a breath. 당신은 생각하는 것보다 더 친절해요. You are kinder than you think. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the specific dark of his eyes, could smell the clean scent of his jacket. His voice dropped. Be careful, Nadia. Learning my language means learning my world. It is not a kind world. Neither is any other world I've lived in. She held his gaze. I'm not afraid of hard things. You should be afraid of this one. But he said it quietly and he didn't move away. Why? Because the more you understand, he said, the more you'll know. And the more you know, he stopped. What? The harder it becomes, he said finally. To pretend this is only an arrangement. The words landed somewhere soft. She took a half step back because she needed the distance. His eyes followed her. That attention, focused and complete and slightly unnerving, never wavered. Is that what you're pretending? She asked. A long pause. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. That's the honest answer. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her. She recognized it the way you recognize the first crack in a wall you thought was solid. Not dangerous yet, but significant. Everything on the other side of that wall already pushing through. His phone rang. The moment shattered. He answered in Korean and walked away, and she stood in the kitchen watching him go and told herself firmly that the hollow feeling in her chest was completely normal and meant absolutely nothing. It meant nothing. She almost believed it. She wore black because Min-ji had said armor disguised as silk, and Min-ji, for all her chaos, understood the particular battlefield of a room full of powerful men. The private dining room was all dark wood and low light and the specific oppressiveness of wealth that has never once questioned itself. 20 men in tailored suits who tracked Nadia's entrance with eyes that calculated and dismissed in the same motion. Shin Jae-won stood at her side, his presence a controlled force field. He introduced her in Korean with a sentence she now understood well enough. My wife, Nadia. The room received this information with the kind of silence that is not really silence. She smiled and held her glass and listened, because she could now, mostly. Her Korean was still rough around the edges, but she caught enough to know that at least 3 conversations were about her. 2 were wondering how long this would last, and 1 was about the basketball. She kept smiling. Then Kim Sang-ho leaned across the table. He was 60, or the kind of preserved 50 that money buys, with a gold watch and the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone he respected. Tell me, he said in English, his voice carrying the room without effort. Does she speak Korean? Or is she just decoration? The room went very still. Shin Jae-won didn't move, but she felt the shift in him. A tightening, like a wire pulled past its limit. She knew, with absolute certainty, that violence was approximately 4 seconds away. 저는 한국어를 배우고 있어요. Nadia said clearly into the silence. I am learning Korean. She held Kim Sang-ho's gaze as she set down her glass. 하지만 제 질문은 한국어로 할 필요가 없어요. But my question doesn't need to be in Korean. She tilted her head. 당신은 왜 이렇게 무례한가요? Why are you so rude? The silence that followed was a different quality entirely. Somewhere to her left, someone choked on their drink. Kim Sang-ho stared at her. Stared at Shin Jae-won. Back at her. Shin Jae-won said, quietly, I believe my wife asked you a question. Kim Sang-ho found something very interesting to look at on the table. The dinner continued. Nadia reached for her water and noticed that Shin Jae-won's hand, under the table, had found hers. Brief, light. He let go before she could respond to it. But she felt it for the rest of the evening. In the car home, he was quiet. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Which part? Defending myself or embarrassing a man in front of his peers? Either. Yes, I did. She looked at him. You were about to do something that would have cost you. I could see it. It would have been worth it. She absorbed that. I don't need protecting Jae-won. First time she'd used his name without the honorific. She didn't plan it. It just came out natural as breathing. He turned to look at her. I know, he said, and the way he said it, not like a concession but like a realization, was somehow more disarming than anything else he'd ever said to her. She looked back out at Seoul's lights and spent the rest of the drive talking herself very firmly out of being in love with a man she'd promised herself she would never surrender to. The promise felt smaller than it had at the beginning. Okay, I need a comment right now. Are you team she should ask? Or team make him say it first? This story is going to split the comments and I am here for it. Subscribe so you're there for the ending. Trust me, you want to be there for the ending. She found out about the 90 days by accident. Her Korean was good enough now that she understood the conversation she walked into on a Wednesday evening. The council members in the living room, Shin Jae-won standing at the window with his back to them. His stillness the specific kind that meant he was furious. She stood in the hallway and listened. 90 days. The marriage must be real by then. An heir or evidence of one, or the council would support the nephew. Hyun-soo, who had no vows and no codes and no particular qualms about how he got what he wanted. Shin Jae-won's response was quiet and absolute and profoundly rude in a way she was only now fluent enough to fully appreciate. The council left. He stood at the window. She stood in the hallway. She should go back to her room. She should pretend she hadn't heard. She should absolutely not walk into the living room and, "How much did you hear?" he said without turning. She stepped into the room. "Enough." A long pause. "Then you understand the situation. I understand that your counsel is threatening you because of a promise you made to protect me." She sat down on the couch. Not running. Not performing calm. Just present. "I understand that there's a man called Hyun-soo who doesn't have your code, and that if they replace you with him, whatever protection I have disappears." He turned from the window. In the low light, he looked tired in a way she rarely let herself see. "Yes," he said simply. "So the vow is costing you your empire. The vow is not negotiable. I know that." She looked at her hands. "That's what I can't figure out. Any rational person would have abandoned it by now. Any rational person would have made a different calculation. I told you, I'm not my father. Tell me about him." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he wouldn't. Then he sat down, not next to her, but close enough that the distance between them felt like a choice rather than a default. "He was powerful," he said. "Respected. Feared. Men like Kim Sang-ho bowed when he walked into a room." A pause. "He came home one night when I was 9. He'd lost something, money, a deal I never knew exactly. He was angry. He took it out on my mother." Nadia was very still. "I was 9, he said again, like the age mattered. "I couldn't stop it. I wasn't strong enough." His jaw worked. "I swore I would never be in that position again. Never be the one doing it. Never be weak enough to let it happen around me." He looked at her directly. "So I built an empire. Made myself the most dangerous thing in every room. Ensured that no one I was supposed to protect could be touched. And the vow came from that. The vow came from the night I found my mother's photograph after she died. She was 22 in it. Before him." A pause. "She looked free. I thought if I ever..." He stopped. "If you ever had a wife," Nadia said quietly, "you wanted her to look like that." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She looked at him. This man who had built himself into a weapon to protect the people around him, who had constructed the most impenetrable possible version of himself, and left one door unlocked from the inside. J1. He looked at her. "I'm not going to let your council take your empire because of a promise you made for my sake. That's not..." She shook her head. "That's not who I am. I'm not asking you to. I know you're not. That's the point." She stood. "Give me some time to think." "Nadia, I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I just need to think." She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall and had a very serious conversation with herself about the difference between surrendering and choosing. Because she'd made a promise. She would never ask. But she was beginning to understand that keeping a promise out of pride was just a different kind of prison. And she was so tired of cages. "I'm not okay. Are you okay?" Comment, "I'm not okay," below if the section hit you somewhere soft. Subscribe if you want to find out what Nadia decides. And like this video so the algorithm shows it to everyone who needs a story like this in their life today. The window exploded at 11:47 p.m. She was reading on the couch. Her Korean was good enough now for novels, slow ones with a dictionary open, when the glass came in like a wave. She didn't scream. Her grandmother had once said that screaming wastes the seconds you need for moving, and the lesson had lodged in her nervous system permanently. She was already dropping to the floor when Shin Jae-won crossed the room in 3 strides and covered her body with his. Glass rained down. More shots. He was shooting back. She hadn't even seen him draw the gun. 3 precise sounds that came from directly above her head. Then, silence. His weight on her back. His breathing controlled and deliberate. His heartbeat, which she could feel through her shoulder blades, significantly faster than his face would ever admit. "Are you hurt?" he said against her ear. "No. You? No." She could hear his security team flooding the apartment. Voices in Korean, all clear, perimeter secured, source identified. She felt him start to move and then stop. "J1. I'm fine. You're bleeding." The glass had caught him across the forearm. Not deep, but bleeding freely. He looked at it with the kind of detached assessment he might give a weather report. "Superficial. Let me see it. Nadia, let me see it." He let her see it. She found the first aid kit she'd located on day 4, because she was the kind of person who located the first aid kit on day 4, and cleaned the cut with steady hands while around them his team swept the apartment and made phone calls and moved with the efficiency of people who had done this before. "The council," she said, working carefully. "Is this them?" "No." His voice was controlled. "This is a rival. Someone who heard about the marriage and decided I was distracted." A pause. "They were not wrong." She paused. Looked up. "I was distracted," he said. "I missed a signal I should have caught because I've been—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. "I've been thinking about you instead of thinking about the things I'm supposed to be thinking about. That is a liability I cannot afford." She set down the antiseptic. "Is that what I am to you? A liability?" "No." The word was immediate. "That's the problem." She stared at him. He stared back. His security team leader appeared in the doorway. She knew enough Korean now to catch. "Safe room, immediately, we go now." "Tell them we're coming," Shin Jae-won said, in Korean, without looking away from her. The safe room was concrete and steel and barely large enough for 2 people and a cot. The door sealed behind them with a sound like the world ending. She sat on the cot. He stood against the wall. Outside, she could hear his team working, voices moving through the apartment, the specific sounds of a threat being systematically dismantled. "How often does this happen?" she asked. "Less often than it used to. More often than it should." "That's not really an answer." "No." He looked at the floor. "It's not." J1. He looked up. "When the window broke," she said carefully, "you didn't think about strategy. You didn't think about your men or your position. I just got to you." His voice was very quiet. "Yes." The room felt smaller than it was. "Why?" A long silence. Outside, distant voices. The ordinary sounds of aftermath. "Because," he said, "somewhere in the past 2 months you stopped being an arrangement. And I don't have a better explanation than that. I've tried to find one." "Have you?" "Extensively." A pause. "You make terrible coffee jokes, and you correct my staff's English pronunciation, and you left a note for the night security guard with a drawing of his dog on it because you saw his phone wallpaper. You learned my language to understand my world. You walked into a room of dangerous men and asked one of them why he was rude." He looked at her. "I don't know what to do with you." "You could start," she said, "by being honest about what you want." He crossed to the cot, stood in front of her, close enough to touch. "You know what I want. Say it." "Nadia." "Say it, J1. A breath. "I want this to be real. I want you to stop sleeping in the guest room. I want to stop pretending that I work late because of business when half the time it's because coming home to you and not touching you is the hardest thing I've ever done." His voice was rough. "I want to deserve the way you look at me when you think I can't see you." Her eyes were burning. She refused to cry. "And the vow?" she said. "The vow stands. No hesitation. Until you ask. It will always stand until you ask." She looked at this man. This complicated, infuriating, careful, dangerous, gentle man who had built walls around everything soft in himself and left one door open. For her, waiting. She thought about the promise she'd made in her dark apartment on the night men in black suits had taken her future away. "I will never ask." She thought about her grandmother, who had also taught her this. That pride kept you standing, but love was the only thing that moved you forward. She reached up, touched his face with both hands, felt his breath stop. J1. He went completely still. I'm asking. The sound he made was very quiet, almost inaudible, like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time finally, carefully, being released. He pressed his forehead to hers. Are you sure? I've been sure for weeks. I was just stubborn. You are, he said softly, the most stubborn person I have ever met. I know. Are you going to hold it against me? For the rest of my life, probably. Good, she said, and kissed him. He kissed her back like she was the answer to a question he'd stopped believing he was allowed to ask. Outside the safe room, his team secured the perimeter. The city went on being the city. The world continued its ordinary chaos. Inside the concrete and steel room, the vow was finally broken. By choice. By her voice. The only way it was ever supposed to happen. She asked. She finally asked. I cannot. Okay, breathe. Comment your reaction right now. I need to see it. If you've been watching this whole story and haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. Hit the button, like this video, and share it with one person who deserves a love story today. The next morning was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. Coffee, made the way she liked it, left on the counter. Except this time when she came out of the bedroom, their bedroom, he was still there, sitting at the table, reading the news on his phone, looking, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who lived somewhere. He looked up. She looked at him. Joan Achim, he said. Good morning. His voice was unhurried, like they had time, like mornings were something they were planning to keep. Joan Achim, she said back. He almost smiled. Your pronunciation is improving. I had a good teacher. She sat down across from him and stole a piece of his toast. What happens today? Today I dismantle the people who shot at us last night. How? Carefully. And completely. He took his toast back. And then I'm taking you somewhere. Where? It's a surprise. I don't like surprises. I think you know that. I know. You'll like this one. He refilled her coffee. Minji is coming to stay while I handle the morning. She will talk constantly and you will pretend to be irritated but you'll enjoy it. Then I'll be back by noon. She looked at him. You've met me. I have. The not quite smile again. I've also been paying attention. Minji arrived at 9 a.m. like a natural disaster in platform sneakers. Took one look at the two of them sitting at the table with the particular ease of people who had stopped pretending, and burst into tears. I knew it, she sobbed, in Korean, and then immediately switched to English so Nadia could fully appreciate the weight of her victory. I knew it from the day he made you coffee. You owe me 20,001 J1. I said 3 months, you said never, and here we are. I said no such thing. You absolutely said never. Nadia, he said never. I believe you, Nadia said. Traitor, he said, but without any heat. She laughed. Actually laughed. Full and easy and surprised out of her. He watched her laugh with the expression of someone cataloging something they want to remember. Minji pointed between them triumphantly. This is what I wanted. I'm going to cry again. Please don't, he said. She cried anyway. He took her to Namhansanseong. Ancient fortress walls on a mountain above Seoul, stone paths and pine trees and sky so wide it felt like a different world from the city below. They walked without bodyguards, a first, and a small act of trust that she recognized as significant. Just the two of them on paths worn smooth by centuries of feet. The council, she said after a while, being handled. How? Not with violence. He said it like a promise. You were right. Building something legitimate, something that outlasts me, is more dangerous to them than bullets. I'm going to make the empire legal. Take 3 years. But when it's done, Hyun-soo and the council have nothing to threaten. She thought about that. You're doing it. I'm trying. He looked at the city below them. I don't know who I am without the threat of violence as a tool. It's all I've ever known. You know who you are. She stopped walking. Waited until he turned to face her. You're the man who kept a vow when it cost him everything. Who learned a bride's coffee order before he learned her voice. Who knows his bodyguards' names and his sister's tells and exactly what to say to make a room stop. She stepped closer. You're the man who chose to be different, even when no one was making you. That's who you are. He looked at her for a long time. The fortress walls old and patient around them. The city glittering below. The sky enormous above. How? he said quietly. Did my father's debt produce you? Luck, she said. And maybe your mother praying for you from somewhere. Something moved across his face. Vast and quiet and real. He took her hand. Not brief this time. Not accidental. He held it the way you hold something you've decided to keep. They walked the fortress walls as the sun moved west. Two people who had started as a transaction and become something neither of them had words for yet. Something worth protecting. Something worth building. Something that had started with a vow no one asked him to make. Kept by a man no one expected to keep it. Broken finally by the one person who had the right to ask. 1 year later, the charity gala was Nadia's idea. Annual. Scholarships for first-generation students. Named, quietly. For a woman in a photograph who had looked free at 22 and deserved to have something lasting carry her name into the future. Shin Jae-won stood at the edge of the room in a suit that made the photographers follow him even when he was standing still, watching his wife move through the crowd with the ease of someone who had learned, in the past 12 months, that her presence in a room was not an intrusion but a gift. A journalist found him. Young, eager, notepad in hand. Mr. Shin, there's a story about your wedding. The vow you reportedly made. Would you comment? He watched Nadia laugh at something an elderly donor had said. The laugh was real. She had never learned to perform it and he had never wanted her to. The vow was the smartest thing I ever did, he said, because it required her to choose. And she chose. A pause. Everything worth having in my life came from that one decision to wait. The journalist scribbled. And your wife? What does she say about it? Across the room, Nadia looked up, found his gaze through the crowd with the accuracy of someone who had been looking for him before she knew she was looking. She raised an eyebrow. That specific eyebrow that meant, "Are you talking about me?" He smiled. Actually smiled, with his whole face. The way Minji had claimed was physically impossible. The way his wife had apparently decided was a personal challenge. She says, he told the journalist, that she would have asked sooner if she'd known I was going to be so insufferable about it. The journalist blinked. That's not very romantic. No, he agreed, moving toward her. It's better than romantic. It's true. Later, on the balcony, Seoul spread below them like a kingdom that had stopped feeling like a weight. He asked me what I think about the vow, Nadia said. What did you tell him? Nothing. I figured you'd given him enough material. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you regret it? Any of it? He was quiet for a moment. Below them, the city moved. Above them, the stars did whatever stars do when no one is watching. Persisted quietly, throwing light across impossible distances just because that was their nature. I regret, he said finally, that your father made choices that hurt you. I regret that you came here in grief and stayed in fear for longer than you should have. He pressed his lips to her hair. I don't regret a single day since. Even the part where I refused to ask for 10 weeks? Especially that part. It meant more when you did. She tilted her head up. He looked down. J1. Nadia. I love you. I know. At her look. I love you too. I have for longer than I admitted. You were very inconveniently lovable from approximately the 3rd week. Only the 3rd week? You argued with me about bodyguards on the 2nd. It was too early. That's your standard? I had to wait for you to be charmed by my willingness to be guarded. Yes, completely serious. It worked, didn't it? She laughed. He kept his face straight for exactly 4 seconds before the smile broke through. Seoul glittered below them. The gala continued inside. Somewhere across the city, Minji was almost certainly causing some form of beautiful chaos. The dragon had built something that would last. Not because of fear. Not because of power. Because a woman named Nadia Cole had walked into his fortress and refused. Absolutely refused. To be anything less than exactly herself. And because a man named Shin Jae-won had made one vow, in the dark, on a night that could have gone very differently, and kept it, until she asked. We made it to the end. If the story lived in your chest, comment the moment that got you the most. Share this video with someone who needs a love story today. Subscribe for more. I have so many more stories where this came from. And like this video so the algorithm blesses it into every corner of YouTube. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. See you in the next one.